Hey, everybody. Matt Gurney here. It is The Line Podcast. Jen Gerson's with me, recording as we did last week, one evening early so that we can start our long weekends. We're recording this on August the 29th, 2024. Jen is going to explain BC to me. Seems like a tall order, but I think she's up to it. We're going to talk kind of just a little bit of a summer wrap-up, also a bit of a look ahead to the fall. And then I have a curveball I'm going to throw at Jen, and it's nothing scary, but I want to get a gut reaction to her on one issue of federal politics. All that and more on this episode of The Line Podcast. This episode of The Line Podcast has been brought to you by Unsmoke Canada. Canada can be a global leader in reducing the harm caused by smoking, but it requires actionable steps, including giving adult smokers the information they need to choose potentially less harmful alternatives. Learn more at unsmoke.ca. Well, summer's over. How do you feel about that? How are you feeling medically and also like emotionally?
Oh, okay. Do you want to go with my medical status or my emotional status first? Okay,
go with the medical.
I'll go with the medical status first, and that is I can literally feel the low-grade fever begin to tick off in the back of my head and my neck. And I have taken one look at my husband, and he now looks pallid and gray. He literally looks so bad right now that my 7-year-old son was like, "Daddy, you look bad." And he rubbed.
You feel like a summer cold? Like what happened?
Yeah, it's some kind of summer cold, and he rubbed my husband's back because he was like, "You look bad." Anyway, so he's about 12 hours ahead of me on this fever curve. So
we gotta do this podcast now.
I've got to get this done fast before I collapse utterly. So that's my mental health. As for my emotional well-being,
it's fine. I want to mention to the viewers though that like we turned our cameras on, we're talking, and I'm like, "Wow, you look great. You look glowing. Like you look wonderful." And you're like, "Oh, that's the fever." I was like,
that's the low-grade fever that I can literally start to feel creeping up my neck. So yeah, I mean, I do look stunning. It's true. Anyway, so as for my emotional well-being, on one hand, we get so few good months in this godforsaken wasteland of a country that every single day that there is sun and that I can swim in a lake is a gift to me. It's a personal gift to me from God.
Every day is a gift.
But, also if you have a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old and you have to truck them around the city to 2 separate summer camps for 3 months straight, I have not had 3 hours to sit down and just write, basically since May. So I'm freaking out. Yeah, no, I'm completely freaking out. I'm completely behind on all of my deadlines, and I've underproduced for The Line, and I'm sorry, Brian Line listeners. I'm sorry, my publisher at Penguin Random House. The book was supposed to be done by now, and it's not. So on that note, I'm really, really happy to see that summer's coming to an end. I'm very, very happy just to feel the slight briskness in the breeze and the wind. I've started to get my creepy decorations out, and I think I'll probably be festooning this office with eerie little things like skulls and pumpkins, because that's just how I roll.
I'm with you. I'm always sad when summer ends. My kids are a bit older than yours, and I feel like they're on the accelerating slope of aging, and I just feel them slipping away. So that's always sad, because summers you get them back a bit. But also, I've already told one person who asked me for a meeting this week, I said, no, let's do it next week because my productivity will be up 15,000% as of Tuesday when my kids go back to school. So
that's right. Yeah. They're nightmares. We love them very much, but they're nightmares.
There's just a lot. And, when you've got them back, you want to spend time with them, but actually like getting work done.
Not possible.
Got 2 kids at home and a wife who's a teacher who doesn't work during the summer, and there's only one person in this house who actually seems to think I actually do work from home. Like, hey, Daddy's home all summer. We'll just go talk with him. Like, I had to say to my son a few weeks ago, I love you very much. And if you talk to me again before I finish this article, I'm going to exile you from this family. So
Did it work?
It did.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's good. So
things
keep that
were
thread
going
up.
Great.
Keep that thread up.
So you want to tell me about British Columbia, your original birth province?
Starts at the Rockies, has a bit of a weird spot at the top that kind of quasi Alberta, and then goes to the sea. Big politics in BC, and we do have to pay attention to it. I'm sorry, Toronto. I'm sorry, Ontario. But what's going on there is bananas. I started to get texts about this, I think the other night.
Me too.
And
Which is weird.
it's pretty great. So I'm not going to claim to be a BC expert. In fact, some of our commenters below have criticized us very rightly for ignoring British Columbia. I'm sorry. We, like every other journalist in this entire godforsaken country, basically forget that Canada exists once you hit the mountains. BC has always been a political entity unto itself. We
it's
are
like a force field of the Rockies that my attention cannot penetrate.
And I think it's also the time change really hurts as well, right? It's 3 hours behind Central Time. However, we did, when we were criticized about this a couple months ago, we did start to work to rectify this problem. We do expect to have a very good piece on BC coming early next week. So once the long weekend is over, so do watch for that. We are on BC. We are on it. We're on BC. So we are going to get to it. But for those people who are not caught up, basically what's happened here is that roughly 50 days ahead of the next provincial election, the BC United Party, which has been active, I believe, according to this news article I have up, for the last 100 years, his leader...
They're the inheritors of the BC Liberals, right? They were the BC Liberals?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Wait. Let me double check that. BC Liberals.
I think BC United
it is
was
right.
BC
BC
Liberals
United,
and they
correct,
rebranded.
Correct. That's correct. BC Liberals rebranded as BC United.
Toronto.
Thank you very much. Very much appreciate that. Yes. I was pretty sure you were right, but I did want to double check that. As I said, I'm blaming my illness for my mental incompetence at the moment.
Yeah, we'll go.
Anyway, you're right. So the BC Liberals rebrand as BC United. The Liberals aren't really the Liberals in BC. The Liberals were always kind of like this centrist, kind of more conservative situation in BC. There's a split between the Liberals and the BC Conservative Party. Liberals get rebranded as to BC United. I think that's right. BC United, about 100 days ahead of their next election, is led by a man named Kevin Falcon. He comes up out of the blue, basically says, there's no path to victory for us here, and we're just going to give up. We're going to disband the party. We're going to work with the BC Conservatives to try and work out who is the most viable candidate in each riding. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to encourage all of you guys to vote for the BC Conservatives in the hope of stopping this train wreck David Eby NDP government. So BC United, I believe, is sitting somewhere around 10% at the polls. They're starting to flirt with fringe territory. So it does make sense for him to do this and to try and reunite a conservative style faction. I think this goes to the thesis that many people have that all parliamentary systems eventually devolved into two-party systems because that's just where the math goes. I think this is probably another data point for that thesis. And the other thing I just think is particularly crazy about this is that this is happening so close to an election, right? This is very Hail Mary pass. It's very flailing. It does seem to be, it's been described to me by our writer on the ground here as a seismic shift in BC politics. Mm-hmm. So whether or not this is enough to change the outcome of the election, really interesting. Don't know. If it does change the outcome of the next election, what does that foretell for a conservative wave through Western Canada and through into the other provinces as well? Another interesting question. I don't have the details or the analysis to offer at this point, but I did insist on starting the podcast on BC because it is a big deal from a politics point of view.
So here I am on the wrong side of the impenetrable attention force field. I don't know much about BC politics, and I wish I knew more. And that's why I 100% agreed with you when you told me a couple of months ago that we'd had some pushback on this and that we need to get better at BC. I agree.
Yep. We suck at BC. Sorry, BC.
We love you. Like, we honestly love you guys, but it's like your politics are just weird. So
super weird, very like bizarre, fringy, conservative / hippy dippy weirdness. I can't follow it. I'm from BC, by the way. I was raised there.
Yeah, you're Vancouver suburbs.
Yes, I was. Port Coquitlam, man, represent. So like, I should be better at this, and I'm not. I'm sorry. I feel shame.
Okay, well, you know what? You can stew in your shame for a bit. I'm just going to make the point that one of the things I immediately pivoted to one of my political nerd buddies, and like I basically took this week off. It's kind of the last week, but it is the last week of summer holidays. So I basically took it off, and I basically pivoted to a buddy who's good at politics. And I said to him, I need you to tell me if I need to care about this. And he said, yes. And I'm like, fuck, like I don't want things I have to care about. It's my last week. And I basically said to him, okay, I promise I'll care about it later. Explain it to me like I'm 5 and I have a concussion. What do I need to know about this now? And he thought about that for a minute, and then he said to me, basically exactly what you said, that a party rebranded, the Liberals, BC Liberals that were the centrist party in BC, or the Conservative Party, because that's one of the weird things about BC. No, the Conservatives are actually Liberals. Whatever.
Sort of, yeah, whatever.
Sure, guys, sure. But basically, my buddy said to me, he thinks this is another data point in exactly what you were saying a minute ago. The center isn't holding.
Yep.
And obviously, we're going to talk federal politics in a little bit, but that to me, I just thought was a really interesting insight. I don't pretend to know much about BC politics. I'm excited to learn more. But if it does fit a pattern of centrist parties getting in trouble because all the energy right now is at the polls, it ain't the Conservatives folding into United. It's the other way around.
That's
so,
right.
Okay.
Data point, interesting. We will have a more detailed and interesting analysis coming from a writer who actually covers BC politics full time. I'm not going to claim to be that writer. And again, I'm stewing in shame.
Well, I was going to say also, like, basically, by the time of that lands, you'll be up to like a 104 fever and we'll all be.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I won't stop me from working, but, just so
it might. It might. At a certain point, it might.
Yeah, well, anyway. Look, we wanted to do a little roundup of the provinces.
Yeah, you want me to do Ontario now, or do you want to do Alberta?
Why don't you do Ontario, and then I can get back to my comfort zone.
So it's not going to be much of a roundup. Like there's not a ton that's been happening in Ontario right now. Speculation about an early election. From what I can tell, that speculation is probably legit, but it's not imminent. But anyway, one of the things we've been blessed with this week, and we're going to talk about some of this a bit later on. I'm going to throw a little bit of a pop quiz at you, but which is unfair when you're feverish.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting a battery of late summer polling. Because like everybody's getting back to work, and a new poll came out looking specifically at Ontario, and I just laughed at this. And you can insert all the caveats you want. Oh, the only poll that matters is election day, blah blah blah. But Doug Ford, it would still win a huge majority if there was an election held today. And I bring this up not because I'm a fan of Doug Ford. I think anyone who reads my TVO columns knows that I'm not a fan of Doug Ford. But what I do find interesting is that you and I try to tell people this a lot. If you are listening to our podcast, if you're reading The Line, if you're following us on Twitter, and I say this with love and affection, but you're a weirdo. The average Canadian does not follow this stuff that closely.
No.
And one of the things that made me laugh, it was an Abacus poll, and one of the things that David Coletto and his team found was that one of the reasons why Doug Ford remains very, very popular is because a large number of Ontarians think that he is nice.
I was hoping you were going to say fine, but nice I'll take.
We'll take nice.
Take nice.
And I think it's funny
is
because
he nice? I don't know.
We're going to publish this, and we're going to have people who are savvy political readers. We're going to fill up our comment sections. They're going to send us emails. They're going to want to debate the nuances of the issues of the day.
Mm-hmm.
But the average voter out there thinks that Doug Ford is nice, and he would win a third majority government today on the basis the voters think he is nice. And I just think this is such a valuable and useful reality check, because something I have tried to tell friends of mine who are Ontario Liberals or Ontario Dippers is that Doug Ford ain't the boogeyman to the broader public that he is in your mind. Mm-hmm. And if you try to campaign on Doug Ford being an asshole, you're going to lose. If you try to campaign on Doug Ford wanting your grandmother to die, or he wants to burn your community ground or something like that, you're going to lose. Sooner or later, reality is going to sandblast Doug Ford's political Teflon off. It happens to every politician. You and I have talked about this before. No one
lasts forever.
No one
lives forever.
Sure, we'll go with it. We'll go with that.
What's the Batman quote? You either die a hero or live long enough to become a villain. Yeah,
that will happen to Doug Ford eventually, but it shows no sign of happening yet. And I think, and the funny thing is, I used to try and tell my conservative federal friends this, that the average Canadian did not hate Justin Trudeau as much as you did and as much as you wanted them to. Now, I think they might be getting there, but it took a decade. And maybe for Doug Ford, it's going to take a decade too. He's halfway through his second term now. And this is just, to me, a useful reminder, gut check, reality check, whatever you want to call it. If you are nerdy enough to be a regular or even first-time listener to the Line podcast, 85 to 90% of the Canadian population cares about politics less than you and will base their vote on the vibes and the feels. And as long as Ontarians think Doug Ford's nice, he's going to keep winning because he's a nice man.
So, firstly, is he nice? I don't know. I just have one point, and that is Doug Ford doesn't sit easily with an extremist bogeyman critique. Is a point that somebody was making before he got elected the first time.
And how did that go for that somebody?
Not great. Not great. And I would also like to point out that every single successive majority government that Doug Ford wins is one fewer smug asshole in my comment section on Twitter talking to me about the Doug Ford will be fine headline that I didn't write. So on that note alone, and that's all I have to say about that.
You're not donating to the Ontario PCs, are you? You're not donating to the Ontario PCs, are you?
No, I don't care. I don't live there. I don't go there, man.
You don't even go here.
I don't even go here. It's not my thing. Lastly, what is my thing?
This podcast has a surprisingly high volume of Mean Girls references, considering that I've seen it twice, and I don't know if you've seen it at all.
Is that even surprising, Matt? I mean, honestly, nobody's electing us because they think we're nice. Okay? We don't have that branding problem. Sorry, I am going to try and cut down on the up talk. I realize I started to fall into that today. Look, so the last thing I am going to talk about is where I do go, which is Alberta. So this was a special request from a reader or a longtime listener who loves the Line podcast. Hey, Cynthia. Who asked us to get into the latest little drama coming out of Alberta. This was Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta, did a town hall at Drayton Valley this week, where she talked about essentially introducing more competition into the healthcare system by threatening to take Alberta hospitals away from the management of Alberta Health Services and giving them over to other types of care providers, for example, Covenant Health. With her argument being, look, if you bring in more competition to the system, that's going to force everybody to be more efficient and increase efficiency within the system. And of course, everybody started to freak out because Covenant Health, for those of you who may not be aware, is essentially it's a Catholic-run parallel health administrative system. And they run, I believe, about 6 hospitals in Alberta already. They've existed in their current iterations since 2008, but essentially church-run hospitals have been a feature of Alberta's healthcare system since before there was an Alberta. It's more than 150 years that we've had Catholic-run or religious-run institutions do healthcare.
They're pretty ubiquitous throughout history. I mean, a lot of them are no longer religious-run, but you have hospitals.
That's right.
We talked about. We have Mount Sinai Hospital in Toronto. It's now a public hospital, but its tradition was as a Jewish hospital. Probably half the U.S. hospitals are called Presbyterian something.
That's right. So that's fine. What makes Covenant Health a little bit controversial, and in some places very controversial, particularly among progressives, is that they are actually accountable to the Catholic bishop, to the see, essentially, here in Alberta. And that's because they are so. They don't provide things like abortions. They don't do things like medical euthanasia. I'm calling it euthanasia because made is jargon. I'm sorry. It's euthanasia. They don't do more euthanasia. The healthcare that they provide is I believe generally considered to be of very, very high quality, but they don't do things that run contrary to the doctrines of the Catholic Church.
They're publicly funded, right?
Oh yeah, they're publicly funded. That's right. So one of the big takeaways from Danielle Smith's commentary, how should I say this? It focused really heavily on the idea that this was a sop to social conservatives, like you're going to take away abortion access in rural Alberta, because that is the hot button beep issue. I think that what she's describing is extremely ideologically motivated, but it's not motivated by social conservatism. It's motivated by a kind of a small government libertarianism that actually wants to introduce more private healthcare providers and more competition into the healthcare system. And to be fair to Smith, she's very open about that. This isn't, there's no secrecy about this. I don't think that she is actually motivated to move these hospitals over to Covenant Health because she's trying to restrict access to abortions. That may be the end result of some of these choices if that's the way the government goes. But I actually don't think that's the primary motivation here. I think the primary motivation here is absolutely trying to minimize the role of Alberta Health Services. So look, is she doing that the right way? Is this the right way to go about this? Is introducing more competition into the system a correct call? I don't know. To be honest with you, I think it would need to be analyzed. And I always try to be, I try to be agnostic about policy proposals when they are being proposed or when they're being rolled out up front. And I think that my role is probably more to critique stuff as they've been rolled out and when we start to see what the outcomes of those things are. I mean, people who followed the podcast will know I kind of take the same approach when it comes to, for example, harm reduction policies.
Mm-hmm.
I'm agnostic on what kind of harm reduction balance you're looking for. If you're looking for a balance of safe supply or providing certain types of drugs in a supervised case versus a recovery-based approach. I can be agnostic about what the correct mix of that is, but show me the outcomes, right? Show me the actual results of your policies. And I think one of the great things about and one of the great things about living in a confederation is that different provinces can experiment with different mixes of these things. That's okay. And I think that it is okay for Alberta to try to introduce more competition into a healthcare monopoly. Let's see how that goes, so long as we can be really, really ruthless about who's getting the contracts, whether or not the people getting the contracts are politically well connected, and what the actual healthcare outcomes are. If Covenant Health actually is doing a better job of, for example, keeping rural hospitals open, then that might be a good answer for certain rural hospitals, provided that people and provided that if that's the way that this goes, I think that this is a government that also has to be able to account for an organization like Covenant Health taking over in certain areas by providing certain access to abortion care, for example, maybe expanding telemedicine for abortion access, that sort of thing, right? Like there's ways to go about doing that. But I remain agnostic as to whether or not it's a good idea or not. However, I don't want to get too wrapped up in the hysterical top line, which is Danielle Smith coming for your abortions, because I don't necessarily think that's the motivation here. But if the outcome of these choices is to significantly reduce abortion access or significantly reduce euthanasia access in certain parts of Alberta, then I think that there would be a very fair and legitimate critique to be made there. And I think that the government would deserve every little bit of shit it gets. But I don't want to assume that that's the motivation when I think that the actual stated motivation is probably the correct one, which is that Danielle Smith is very much a small government libertarian and actually does believe that introducing more competition and more adversarialness within the healthcare administration system is probably a good answer. Is it? Is it? I don't know right now. I don't know. But anyway, that's just kind of my top line take on that issue. Cynthia, thanks for calling. That's sort of our approach on this. I think it's something to watch. I think it could be interesting or it could be a disaster, but I think it is worth watching.
One comment, one question. I'll do the comment first. The Overton window on healthcare in Canada is changing.
Yes.
It's moving, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know if it's going to move enough. I was actually just talking about that earlier this week with some of my buddies, where we were trying to quantify in our own mind, will a Prime Minister Poilievre, hypothetically, of course, be a radical conservative leader in the sense of making structural changes? Or will he trickle out red meat to the base and solidify his support that way? And one of the things I asked my buddies is, would a Prime Minister Poilievre fundamentally change the Canada Health Act? And they didn't have it. They didn't have an answer. I didn't expect them to have an answer, but we're talking about that in a way that we wouldn't have talked about that before. So I just note that with interest, and I'll leave it at that.
That's something that you and I should have an on the line event about. We should actually get some healthcare experts to talk about how we need to address or change the Canada Healthcare Act, especially facing the demographic shifts we're facing.
Get through Labor Day before you get ambitious.
Oh, no, it can't be done.
Here's my question.
Well, again, we'll see where the fever goes.
My question is simply this. We were talking a couple of minutes ago about Doug Ford. People like him because he's nice. Danielle Smith, social conservative extremist. Is that label going to stick no matter how many times a guy like Nenshi or critics try to hit her with it? To me, look, I don't know Danielle well, but libertarian, yeah. SoCon, I don't know. You tell me. Does that work on her,
no,
or is Danielle?
It doesn't. I mean,
does she have a nice aura the way Doug Ford does?
I don't know if she has a nice aura, but I would say this is that. Do I think that she would throw a couple of sops to a base ahead of a leadership review, as basically people are expecting her to do this fall? Yeah, I believe that. I believe she would probably throw policies to a socially conservative base that she thought made sense from her ideology. But Danielle Smith is not a social conservative. She just isn't. She's very much on the libertarian wing of this side of it. Always has been. She's always been. I mean, she's going to come out with some policies on transgender stuff, which of course we've talked past and we'll probably talk to it when she tables some legislation. But on the whole, like gay rights, she's very much whatever, cool, you do you. Abortion has never really been an issue for her. I just don't. If she's throwing sops to a social conservative base, they're just that. They're sops. She's just not a social conservative. She just isn't. So I don't think it's a particular label that will stick to her if you are a progressive trying to present her as something. Could you credibly present her as someone who is ideologically extremist on a lot of different files? Yeah, I think that might stick. Just in some corners, I think that would be a more credible alignment. Could you say that she's got weird judgment, weird alignment of her circle or the people who are advising her? Sure, I think that those types of criticisms would stick. I'm still to this day shocked that the NDP didn't go much harder on Danielle Smith in the last election. They could have pulled out reams and reams and reams of content from her newsletters, from her radio shows, all kinds of things that they really pulled their punches in a big way. This is what we
were talking about last week. Danielle Smith must be likable enough that she was able to overcome the unelectable threshold that you and I frankly couldn't.
I'm not sure it's likability. It's put it this way, is that a lot of the people on the left set her up to be this crazy extremist. And then what the public was presented once the alert was dropped was someone who was like, well, maybe I don't agree with her on everything, but she seems okay. Or at least okay enough to get enough support to get a trial run at premier kind of thing. But with some caveats. I mean, it wasn't a particularly strong performance by the UCP. Like, that was a very winnable election by the NDP, but they, in my opinion, ran a pretty terrible campaign. So, again, Danielle Smith, social conservative? No. Danielle Smith is in the pocket of social conservatives? Maybe. Danielle Smith has bad judgment, or as if I were, and I'm not saying that this is my personal opinion. I'm saying that if I were sitting in an NDP war room trying to throw spaghetti at the wall, these would be kind of the tacks that I would be going down. And I do think that this particular story demonstrates or provides a data point on this is someone who is very ideologically committed to her positions, whether or not you agree with them or not. So I think it's interesting, but yeah, social conservative, no, I don't see that.
Can you imagine how annoying you and I would be if we were sitting in an NDP war room?
Have we considered being more reasonable?
No, we would just be the guys saying to them, yeah, normal people don't talk like this.
Yeah.
Like, this is not.
Yeah.
The largest plurality of Ontarians think Doug Ford is nice.
Or when you talk about the trans stuff, I mean, the transgender stuff, especially where it comes to children. I mean, we've talked about this in the past when it comes to Danielle Smith previously.
Crime, needles, and parks.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, I understand that there's a discourse that's happening around this on Twitter. But if you think that the majority of Albertans are going to be opposed to the idea that, you can't socially transition your kids to school without your parental consent, sorry, that is super majority support territory in real landia. So, I mean, I think sometimes she's dropping some of these policy promises and policy proposals with the full I think she's baiting Nenshi. I think she's baiting her main NDP competitor with Naheed Nenshi, because she knows that if she just throws these little carrots, Nenshi's going to go for it and present himself with a Twitter acceptable position that is actually read as extremist to the general populace.
Yeah.
That's actually what I think she's doing in a lot of these cases.
Oh, and I think the federal conservatives do similar things.
Absolutely. This is a game, right? So anyway,
They throw the odd firecracker into the other guy's tent.
Yep.
Well,
So, like,
okay.
look,
I mean, that
I'm really interested to see what's going to happen in the Alberta Health File. I think that I'm going to add this to my wheelhouse because I'm really interested to see how it's going to go about. I think there's every possibility that it will be an actual administrative disaster or costly overrun, and something that, like I said, the thing that I'd be most concerned about is that the sort of people who are going to get these contracts are going to be politically well connected, right? So you have all kinds of cushy corruption opportunities for that. That's where I think the stories are actually going to be.
you've made the point more than once that Alberta is a pretty small town.
Yeah. I know everybody.
Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
This episode of the Line Podcast has been brought to you by Unsmoke Canada, which is dedicated to helping Canadians who are looking to quit smoking understand the full range of options available. Despite decades of government programs and regulations, today nearly 5 million Canadian adults smoke cigarettes. Adult smokers who choose to continue to smoke should be aware that other options exist. Right now, accessing information about these options is heavily restricted in Canada. While not risk-free, alternatives such as heated tobacco and vaping products provide a potentially less harmful choice than cigarettes. Cigarettes burn tobacco, resulting in smoke that contains 6,000 harmful chemicals that are associated with smoking-related disease and death. Heated tobacco and vaping products have the potential to significantly reduce this risk. Health agencies around the world are now considering these alternatives to help end smoking. Updated laws can help adult smokers better understand the full range of options available, including the relative risks of these products. Millions of Canadians smoke cigarettes. Technology exists that can help change that, but policymakers need to take actions. Learn more about how a smoke-free future can be achieved at unsmoke.ca. Okay.
Just so that we're clear, I can literally start to feel my will to stay upright draining. It's starting to happen. I can like
I've felt like that for years.
It's up to my nose now.
Yeah, you're doing great, kid.
I'm doing
You're
great.
doing
Just
great.
keep it up. Just keep it up with your half-sensical ramblings. People love it.
Like and subscribe. Okay. End of summer, start of fall. I want to make a comment. I think the federal Liberals succeeded this summer. What I mean in a big picture sense is if you remember where we were at the end of June, we were wondering if there was going to be a full-on mutiny, and there wasn't. And I think the Liberals had one thing they had to do this summer, which was survive this summer. And I think they've basically done that. And what I think is really interesting, I was looking, there's weekly polling and there's always bumpy results up and down. But I've been using the Leger polling because they're polling a large group of Canadians once a month. Nothing's changed. This summer kind of feels like a real stasis summer politically. But you might have seen, and I know I was interested in it, a story from the CBC describing staffer mutiny in the Liberal Party. And apparently, according to this is a CBC report, the CBC reporting that with a by-election coming up in Montreal, that the Liberals are facing problems from staffers not being willing to go out and campaign because they think the government has been insufficiently pro-Palestinian or anti-Israeli, however they want to describe it. I do not know internal Liberal Party dynamics enough to draw any conclusions from that. The only real conclusion I took from it was summer's over, because we hit Canada Day weekend
and
when we were like, oh, will there be a mutiny? And we're hitting Labor Day weekend wondering if there's going to be a mutiny. Time is a flat circle. Everything's a horseshoe, blah, blah, blah. Here we are again. Now, I know you're about to keel over, but I do want to ask you,
yes,
what is your sense of the vibe as we get back to real life when silly season begins to end? Just give me a gut check.
Okay, so my gut check is that the Liberals had one task this summer, and it wasn't just to survive, it was to stay quiet. I think that they had to... Gerson Trudeau personally had been radically overexposed. So they tamped down, like, I don't think I saw him once doing anything during the summer. He wasn't Stampede, he wasn't anywhere. So I think that part of the deal that the Liberals needed to do is they needed to basically squirrel Justin Trudeau away in a carpet and put him on the back of a plane somewhere and we'd not see him. So, I mean, I'm sure that he's done a couple events, but it's not been very high profile. I think that's been successful. The Conservatives have not filled that vacuum with self-destructive crazy, as I think the Liberals were hoping that they would do. I think everybody's attention has absolutely been elsewhere for the last few weeks, as it ought to be. It's summer, it's Canada. And now we get to see whether or not the rest has done anybody any good. Has there been actual reflection? Has there been time for change? Also, bluntly, like I think that right now we're in a period of ragging the puck. I don't think there's a path back for the Liberals from where they are today. I think my big prediction right now is that it doesn't matter whether or not they have an election in 3 months or 4 months or 6 months, or if they really rag it out to the end. The results are more or less baked in at this point. Nobody's changing their mind. They're at the end of the tenure. Everybody knows they're at the end. And at this point, they're putting on a sporting show. So what's the value add in ragging the puck? Well, they can hope that, say, a Trump election will shift the momentum for them. I don't think it will, especially not now that it's possible that Kamala Harris might win. So there's that. What could the ragging the puck also do? Could change fortunes on the economy. I mean, maybe things bounce back, things get a little easier. The longer they rag it out, the higher that probability is. Again, I don't see that happening. I don't think the economy's bouncing back. They could be ragging the puck in the hope to reverse some of their least popular policies and their most problematic issues. Temporary foreign workers and student visas come to mind. So we could start to see some relief on that. They could be ragging the puck because they actually have a plan that will make some kind of material difference on housing. I'm not optimistic that that's the case. They could be ragging the puck because they actually still have some real top-line stuff that they need to get forward. I personally think that the Liberal Party has run out of ideas, has been out of real transformative ideas for about 4 or 5 years now. So I don't think they're going to come back from this summer with renewed vigor and vim. And even if they did, I'm not sure that at this point it's enough. The momentum is so hard against them and has been so consistently against them for so long that I now think the trend lines are pretty baked in. So, yeah.
I think that's a pretty good vibe check. My vibe check, we talked a little bit about this podcast or two ago, was that Canadians, and this is like Torontonians, I'll say that because, I haven't traveled much this summer. I've been pretty much in and around the GTA. Not hearing people talk politics.
Nope.
Definitely hearing people talk cost of living.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely hearing people talk crime.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that weird term, and I hate it because it's jargon. I hate jargon, but I'll throw one at you anyway. The issues matrix. And that an issues matrix is basically when a politician, for any parties campaigning, they look at the issues that are animating the voters right now. And you could look at top 3, you look at top 10, and then you try to decide, is this a good matrix for me or not? Is this something where me and my party and my brand and our policy proposals are going to help, or are we going to get killed? And I'm not seeing any reason to think we're looking at a big issues matrix switch. And I think there could be, because one of the weird things we've both experienced in recent years, and you and I have talked about this quite a bit, was how quickly COVID ended, how quickly Ukraine, the war didn't end, but it dropped off the front pages. We're really, really good at just totally ignoring things. So 6 months from now, you and I might look back at this podcast and go, oh yeah, remember when crime was a big deal?
Yeah.
But I want to show you something.
Right.
Literally, I'm going to have to cover, because my address is on the bottom of this and I'm not going to dox myself, but I just got the CAA free magazine for CAA subscribers.
Safe and sound. Your guide to auto theft, peace of mind.
I track little weird things like this. I heard radio ads in the GTA for home security systems, specifically anti-car theft devices. When I was last weekend, as we've already we mentioned in our very brief dispatch last weekend, you and I were both out of town for family events. I paid almost no attention to the news. But while I was doing some food prep, I had the CP24, which is Toronto's kind of all news all the time channel. Lead story was an attempted kidnapping in the parking lot of a shopping mall where 4 men accosted a woman. Police said it was targeted, so it wasn't something random. But the footage of that thing captured by passersby and security cameras, that was leading. And I've just been wondering what the issues matrix is going to be. And there's always room for curveballs. But my vibe check as we leave the summer and we start to get back to it is that I think Canadians tuned out for 2 months. And I might be projecting a bit there because I certainly tuned out for 2 months. But I think we're coming back kind of where we left off. And we're all still pissed off at each other because half the population thinks the other half is supporting a Actually, 100% of the population thinks somebody's supporting a genocide. We're just split down the middle on who's genociding who.
Right.
People are still freaked out. I shouldn't be doing this still, but I was grocery shopping the other day and my wife hates this about. My attitude is always, I'm going to buy what we need and the bill might hurt. Whereas my wife's attitude is more, we must really scrutinize the prices to maximize our shopping dollar. I don't have that kind of time. I go into the grocery store. I'm like, we need onions. Here's onions. Boom. Throw them in the cart. But I made the mistake of looking at a price tag on an item.
Oh, God. And
my brain could not reconcile the price on the tag with the item I was buying.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this should be like $1.99. You know what it was? I'll tell you, it was tuna. It was little tins of tuna.
Yeah, those should be like $2. Maybe $3.
You know what? In my mind, it should be like 99 cents. You should be able to go to like the canned food aisle and find like tuna where if you buy like 3, you get them for $3.
Tuna is what you live off when you're a poor college student and you have no money. Tuna and pizza buns, man. This is how you survive.
Or ramen noodles and dump some tuna into it.
Yeah.
I had bucks when I was in university, but I ate like I didn't because that food was delicious.
Ew.
Couldn't find tuna for less than $3 a tin. And I've just been wondering, and I talk about this sometimes with my buddies. A lot of my buddies are lawyers and doctors and white collar business professionals. We're all feeling the pinch. How is 95% of the population putting food on the table?
Food banks.
Food bank usage is up. And
I mean, like, people do what they got to do, man.
Issues matrix. It's a weird one. And we mentioned a minute ago, Overton windows, right? On healthcare, it's moving.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine 10 years ago thinking that when Justin Trudeau is coming up around that decade mark where it's hard for prime ministers to get reelected, that the leading issues would be price of food, homelessness, inaccessibility of housing, crime? How do the Liberals campaign in this environment? School food?
It's a hard one, man.
Online streaming? There was this great little moment this week, and I don't mean to pick on him because I genuinely do believe, like the buzz about Dominic LeBlanc has always been that he is one of the more steady hands on the wheel for the Liberals, the ship of state. But he's had a couple of completely brain dead comments in the last couple of months. And this week he was talking about these ISIS dudes, the alleged ISIS dudes, where he talked like he was being, the conservatives were all over him. They're like, how did this guy get into the country? How did we only find out about it now? Why did we have to be tipped off by the French? And LeBlanc is like, hey, this is how the system is supposed to work.
Okay, can I play devil's advocate with the ISIS stuff? Because, I mean, that's a terrible quote. It's a great quote, but it's
not a great quote.
But here's the thing that I would say. And this is where I think the conservatives are being a bit bullshit. When you're dealing with a mass system that deals with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, millions of applicants, whatever, you do have to some extent, be realistic in terms of what your baseline for failure looks like. And it's not going to be 0. Right? Like, and apply this to anything from like medical wait times to catastrophic accidents to, work site places accidents to like in every aspect, in every sphere of human endeavor, there is a failure rate. There's a failure rate in everything we do, right? Accidents happen, catastrophes happen, acts
Space
of God
shuttles blow
happen,
up.
shit blows up. So, like, the fact that this one guy and his kid got in through the immigration system isn't necessarily a failure of the Liberals' immigration policy.
Writ large, yeah. I know.
Writ large. You know what I mean? Like, you have to be able to accept the possibility that even in the best run immigration system, the oddball, the odd bad character, the odd bad case is going to get through, because you're dealing with a massive bureaucracy and a huge number of people. Okay. But I say that with the caveat of when an accident does happen, you also have to have faith that you're working in a system that is going to look at that, find out how it happened, and see if there's any lessons learned that they can apply to the system writ large, right? So I'm not really convinced that the evidence at this point demonstrates some kind of catastrophic Liberal fuck-up as opposed to a baseline level of non-zero failure, which would happen under any government. I think we need to see more evidence to condemn the Liberals on this one.
Totally agree. 100% agree. And I always like to throw a pop culture reference onto the podcast, and this one's going to be less obscure than normal, so the listeners are not going to have a hard time saying this one. But I don't think it's fair to condemn the program because of a single slip-up. So that's my pop culture reference du jour.
Now, if we're finding 30, 40, 50, 20,000, 5,000 slip-ups, now we have some more evidence of a systemic-wide failure. Or if we have evidence of this guy had been clearly flagged on internal watch lists and still got in because you couldn't be arsed to check them, then we have a sign of a systemic failure, right? Different conversation.
This is actually going to be my serious comment on this. I think everything you've just said is fair and reasonable. Maybe the fever is dulling your instincts a bit and forcing you into moderation. But I think what you just said is completely fair. But if you are operating in a realistic framework of knowing that you're going to have a small but non-zero failure rate, any politician with any degree of oversight over that system needs to be smart enough to have pre-approved talking points that attempt to sound humble and attempt to address the fears of Canadians and go, we don't know how this happened. We're going to get to the bottom of this. Like, how many political careers would be saved if politicians found it 10 times easier to go, we're going to get to the bottom of this?
Well, but Mark Miller did that. Mark Miller, like last week, we talked about this. He came out with or the week before we talked about this. He came out with
he's angry and
he's angry. I'm going to talk about we're getting to the bottom of this. We're going to revoke his citizenship. Like he came out with the correct tone. So I don't want to be. I want to keep my powder dry on the Liberals for when I think there's real evidence of an obvious and evidence-based screw-up.
I think there's increasing evidence that Dominic LeBlanc is
bad at this.
It's the second time in a few months where because you remember, like, not that long ago, it was I forget the exact context of this, but he had this humdinger of a line where he said he doesn't spend a lot of time thinking about the machinery of government, which is a weird comment for the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs to make.
That one was also really good.
Like, every once in a, do you remember, no, you and I have talked about this before. No one likes overly managed and overly commed politicians. But if there is one, I'm going to call an exception to this. I'm going to break my own moral tenet here. Dear elected officials and senior staffers, no one's career was ever ended because they said, we understand the public's concern and we're going to get to the bottom of this and we know we need to do better. Can someone who loves Dominic LeBlanc and wants him to be happy just tell him that? Because I want him to be happy. I want everybody to be happy. I'm here for happiness. It's what I'm known for. And if this guy is considered to be one of the steady hands on the wheel types, how do the words, this is the system functioning as it's supposed to, leave his mouth? And I know the point he was trying to make. I get it. But you can't say that. And you and I talked about this before. That joke we have, right? The Liberals are bad at governmenting. but they're supposed to be good at politics. And they're not anymore. Like and subscribe. Just took a quick break from recording the podcast so I could fly to Calgary and hit Jen with a gigantic needle full of epinephrine and a really big Starbucks, just to make sure that Jen can make it through this final segment here.
Right. We can do it. We can do it. I think if you want me to be happy, let's.
I do want you to be happy. I want everybody to be happy.
Let's.
I am here for the happiness of the people.
Mm.
So, I mentioned earlier, I was actually nervous because I've been teasing you and the viewers and listeners that I was going to throw a wild card at you. So the listeners and viewers don't know what I'm going to talk about here, and neither does Jen.
Okay. Which is, I mean, this is a great thing to do to me, this particular state of my.
Yeah, you're up for it.
Appreciate that. Yeah.
What is going to be the weirdest, desperate Hail Mary move we see from the Liberals in the next 12 months?
Well, let's see. We've run the list through abortion, guns,
large played out, not entirely, probably, but largely.
Disinformation.
I think I know what it's going to be, but I'm throwing this one at you blind.
I'm tempted to go like. No, you know what? I know what it is. They got to go all in on Palestine.
Okay, that's not the one I chose, but make the case.
Okay. It's the only hot button issue left. It's the only hot button issue left. And actually, I do think that there's a surprising amount of support for Palestine right across the demographic band, especially around a demographic band that the Liberals really need to maintain. Older boomers and also young people. It might be one of those wedge issues that can pry young people away from the NDP. It's also, I think, a potential weak spot for the Conservatives as well. Also, there's just a lot of passion there. I don't actually think that most Canadians are super engaged in the conversation, but I do think that people who are engaged are really strongly engaged. So I think that if they go wedge on Palestine, that would be one of their last Hail Mary passes.
This is not a debate segment, so I'm not going to argue with you.
Okay.
I accept that.
All right.
But I have a different one.
Okay.
And I want to give you and the listeners and the viewers whom we love the context of how this came up. I was talking with some buddies earlier in the week, and I had already mentioned this conversation. I mentioned the conversation about whether or not Poilievre would actually be a structural reform guy, or if he would be trickle out some red meat, a culture war stuff and appease the base. And one of my buddies said to me, he'll be structural. He's going to make big changes. He said, for instance, he's going to make big immigration changes. And every once in a while, and this gets me in trouble sometimes, more than once, I say things before I think about them. You might find that familiar. I have instinctive responses to things. And I said, no, because by the time the election comes around, the Liberals will have turned hard against immigration.
Well, they've already started to turn hard against immigration.
And the funny thing was, happening. And that's, now they're never going to run a campaign like Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. Fuck immigrants. They're never going to do that. They're always going to maintain the sunny ways branding and messaging around immigration. That's not going to change. But I told some buddies of mine, and this was on Tuesday or something, way earlier this week, that by the time we have the next election, I don't think the Conservatives are going to be running with a specific proposal of we're going to do this to fix immigration. I think the Liberals are going to have done it already. I think what the Conservatives are going to do is they're going to say, these are the guys who fucked it up, so don't vote for them. And then after I said that, we had the story this week that the Conservatives are changing where and when you can apply for a work permit. The Liberals are changing when and where you can apply for a work permit in Canada. And this is following up on temporary foreign worker program changes that they announced earlier this week and that we talked about at length in the last podcast. They are turning on immigration. And I think it's a simple reason. I think both the Conservatives and the Liberals have zeroed in, talked about that issues matrix. I think they have both identified immigration as the key one. And that blows my mind. 5 years ago, if you had asked me what will be the lead issue in Canada in 5 years, immigration, I don't know if it would have made my top 10.
I'm going to take a victory lap here because I was writing about the changing consensus on immigration like months ago, and I thought this was going to be an issue. The interesting thing is, I think that's right. I think it's already happened. I'm not sure whether or not they can actually move fast enough and aggressively enough to neuter it as a topic or neuter it as a problem. I don't think they can. And then the problem is, once they start talking about immigration, they then can't use that as a wedge against the Conservatives.
I know.
Right? Like you can't, once you've decided, yeah, you know what, we are bringing in too many immigrants, we're going to cut our immigration targets to whatever, back to 2018 levels. You then can't go around and say them racist Conservatives want to bring down the immigration level. So like, it's an interesting sort of dilemma. But yeah, I think that's already kind of happening. The problem is they can't go hard on it as a wedge issue.
I think they're going to have to do it defensively.
Yeah, they're going to have to do it defensively, yes. Yeah. But like I said, I think that they've already started moving on this. There was one of my favorite memes, and I put this in a dispatch a couple of months ago, was Justin Trudeau talking about the housing, the impact of immigration on housing policy, and how it's had a really negative impact on affordability of housing. And I did one of those, you know, that meme with the guy shooting the other guy in the couch.
Why did Justin Trudeau do this?
Yeah, why did Justin Trudeau do this? Like, I mean, like, they're the authors of their own misfortune on this stuff, right? And then there's the other problem around the economic side, is that we've always had to balance immigration versus our economic metrics, right? So what does cutting the immigration actually do to the economy? Does that increase cost of living issues? Does that make things worse in some ways for Canadians, right? Because I mean, even if you were to cut immigration dramatically tomorrow, that doesn't build houses, right? It doesn't solve the healthcare system, and it doesn't necessarily cool down the inflationary issues. So, tricky one to navigate. I think there's no easy win for them there.
I think it'll have to be defensive. I think they're going to have to basically like make a tactical withdrawal from that field.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to put it.
If they try to fight on that ground, they're going to get killed.
Yeah.
And I think they're going to have to yield it. And look, I'm sure come election, the Conservatives will say, hey, well, you know, they've done this. Well, we're going to they'll probably have some incremental tweaks, blah, blah, blah.
But this is such a sword issue for the Conservatives, because all the Conservatives have to do is say, we're going to bring immigration back down to the levels that Justin Trudeau set them at in 2016.
Yep.
That's the answer right there, or something like that. Like, because you can't, if we're racist now for doing this, then why wasn't Trudeau racist then for having exactly the same levels back in 2018? Like, this is rhetorically, this is an easy win for the Conservatives.
Like I said, I don't think it's going to work for the Liberals, but I think they're going to have to realize, and I think probably you're right, they are realizing it. And it's such an interesting piece of the meta puzzle of how the Liberals have operated. And you and I have talked about this so much. David McNaughton. I was reading coverage this week, because I'm not good at taking vacations, but I was reading some coverage this week of the cabinet retreat in Halifax for the federal Liberals.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
And yeah, no, I could tell. Yeah, that was right on the tip of your tongue.
I was right on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah. David McNaughton, former ambassador to Washington and considered to be a close Trudeau advisor, made the comment that I kind of laughed at a little bit, which was, there's always been a very reactive government. They're not a proactive government, they're a reactive one. And I read that and I laughed, because they're barely reactive. Like,
just so we're clear, they started changing their tone on immigration months ago. Like, that's not even new anymore.
No, but I also just mean, like, a proactive government will try to get ahead of issues and try to be like, hey, you used the hockey metaphor a few minutes ago, ragging the puck. Here's the other one. Proactive government is thinking where the puck is going to be, as Wayne Gretzky once described. A reactive government is responding to events. A Trudeau Liberal government gets viciously punched in the face by reality, and weeks later goes, what was that? There is a level beyond the normal proactive, reactive spectrum here, where we've talked about this so many times. The most perfect example is the one you've already mentioned, which was guns, firearms. it was obvious to me about 6 weeks before it was obvious to them that they had lost that one. And it's like the bigger the issue, the harder it is for them to begin making those tactical withdrawals. If they had begun making the tactical withdrawals on immigration a year ago, maybe they are not 18 points down in the latest Legge. But now,
and also
the
economic impacts, presumed positive impacts of cutting down on immigration, are going to take years to work their way through the system. So
10 years.
Yeah, like if you cut down immigration today back to, say, 2015 levels, you still have a housing crisis. You still have a cost of living crisis. None of that goes away in the next 3 to 6 to 18 months. Like it's going to take years to work our way back down to a stasis if you cut them tomorrow, right? And then you also run into the same other problems, the old demographic problems, the fact that our workers are aging, the fact that we don't have enough doctors, nurses, and house builders to do this sort of stuff now compounds, and now all of a sudden your GDP numbers start really, really bad as in comparison to the G7, which will have impacts on the dollar, which will have impacts on cost of living, impacts on all of these things, right? So, I mean, there's Jen Gerson, your absolute back of the cracker box economics degree, offering you whatever insight is worth it, was worth what you paid for it on all of this stuff. But I mean, like, there's no easy out here for them.
It's too late.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. All of these problems are baked in. The other fun thing is, too, I'm going to let you go because I have mercy and pity.
You literally can see me falling apart here.
Yeah, a little bit.
My Mean Girls references have dropped right off.
You don't even go here right now.
Wait till I get my burn out.
So, deliverology. If we start doing the right things today, how long is it going to take to actually pull any of them off? So we talk about this government being in a place beyond reactive. I think the evidence suggests they have begun to realize that immigration is not tactically survivable ground for them. And they're going to need to withdraw. Okay. Withdrawing probably saves a little bit of the furniture because they're not going to have to spend time, money, political capital, resources, credibility defending this. But they're still the government. They're going to have to start coming up with proposals.
Yeah. What is the correct immigration level? Defend that.
And what is the correct federal housing policy? Because in parts of the country, not all, but in my part of the country, the real estate market's getting dysfunctional. It's weird. Housing starts are like falling, or at least I haven't looked at the latest months, but last month's numbers weren't good.
No, we are not going to get to the 3 million houses we need next 10 years or whatever it is.
I think we might fall a bit short.
We might fall a tiny bit short of that. Yeah.
You want to go take a hot bath or take some NyQuil or something?
This is not things. These are not desires that I would wish to express in a public forum to our listeners, beloved as they are.
You wouldn't want to tell the listeners you're going to go take like a Tylenol?
I mean, I was going to be specific about the hot bath. I didn't want to get this into an OnlyFans space. We're on YouTube, Matt. YouTube. We're respectable commentators, okay?
I'm just saying we should not rule out a multi-platform strategy. Anything else? Anything else on the radar?
There's nothing else on my radar but death.
Death. Well, that's fun. Did you see I emailed our lawyer today and the subject line was death?
Yes, I did see that. That was funny.
That was good. I really like to get people's attention when I email them.
Yeah.
Well, look, just as the house cleaning note, and Jen, you can keel over now. I'll wrap things up. But the house cleaning note is we are coming back next week at full strength. There will not be a written dispatch this weekend. We're going to come back early next week with a written dispatch. We are going to take a long weekend. I'm based on Jen's dying before our eyes. I'm probably going to have a better long weekend than Jen is. And I wish all of you a great Labor Day long weekend. I wish Jen a robust immune system response and the same to her husband. And to all of you, we'll be back after Labor Day. The line is getting back to normal. We love you all. Thanks for sticking with us over a nice, slow Canadian summer. Like and subscribe.
Today's podcast was brought to you by Unsmoke Canada. Now is the time to modernize Canadian laws so that adult smokers have information and access to better alternatives. By doing so, we can create lasting change. Learn more at unsmoke.ca.